welcome once again. We could not think of a better session to begin our summit by. We have with us Gaurav Shah, who's going to be leading this interesting and much needed conversation on organization building. He's the founder and director of ISTM. We also have with us Shavita Sharma Kukreja, who's the co-managing director of Central Square Foundation, and Prakhar Bhartiya, who is the co-founder of ISD. Without any further delay, Gaurav, over to you.
Thanks, Aishwarya. It was a pleasure being here and really sharing the same panel as Shavita and Prakhar. The topic is organization building. And, when Aishwarya reached out to me, she said, how do we build organizations which can solve social issues? And that was a very interesting premise, because in the topic itself, we've kind of assumed that organizations are important. Aishwarya, there's a lot of literature which talks about how over time organizations actually become very painful. They can become bureaucratic, they can become cumbersome, at times they can also become oppressive. And I've heard many founders and entrepreneurs really cribbing on how it seems to them that they are serving the organization rather than the organization really serving a need that they are driving towards or they are passionate towards. So that danger of starting an organization and seeing it evolve into something that you wouldn't have liked or wouldn't have imagined in the beginning is a real and present danger for all of us to think through. However, having said that, and also given that I represent the Indian School of Development Management, we deeply believe in the power of organizations. If one wants to do long-standing, long-term, complex, challenging, maybe ecosystem building, societal changing work, then organizations in some senses provide the vessel for that to really happen. And what does it really provide? So at the bare minimum, it provides almost a legal standing. It's in existence. It helps you create a standing for yourself with stakeholders around. It provides a accountability mechanism. It provides a place for establishing a common purpose, norms, culture, etc. It's a place to formalize the kind of work that you foresee yourself doing and the kind of problems that you foresee yourself contributing to. So with that in mind, what Aishwarya said, I completely echo. We have such a wonderful panel together. So, we have Shavita, who comes from really strong private sector background, experience, and now for many years has been leading one of India's foremost social sector foundations. So both a grant giving body as well as an operational entity, and looking to contribute deeply into now making FLN happen, or the foundational literacy and numeracy mission happen. And so she will come with an experience of running a not-for-profit foundation, but also the experience of working with tons of entrepreneurs that they have funded. Prakhar comes from very strong grassroots routings and moorings. So Teach for India background, plus the experience of setting up, leading Youth Alliance, and now the Indian School of Democracy. And I bring to the table again a very diverse background. I've been a for-profit entrepreneur. I've worked a lot in the private sector. In the social sector, I've worked across the spectrum. So I've worked for impact investment funds, for-profit social enterprises, and now at ISDM, an entrepreneur, and a founder of a not-for-profit social enterprise. So wonderful. Thank you so much, and welcome to all of you. So Shavita and Prakhar, maybe let's start with the overarching question for this session really is, what are the main foundational blocks of organization building? When we say that, we want to build an organization, what in your mind are the foundational building blocks which contribute to creating a high-performing, mission-focused organization? Maybe we'll start with Prakhar, and Shavita will come to you.
Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks, Shweta and Aishwarya and everyone from the Sathi Summit team to put this together. Should we do it bilingual or is it Aishwarya or just English will do?
No, we could do it bilingual. No
Bilingual.
issues at all.
Okay, thank you so much. I think for me, Gaurav, I think what comes when I think about the foundational blocks, and I'll maybe share a couple of them and then go back to Shweta and then add more if need be. I think one becomes is the passion with which I think it is started, the organization. So, and that passion needs to translate in the culture of the organization. So, organization culture becomes like a one of the most important thing when it comes to because, like you said, the theme is organization building for social change. So, when we are talking about social change, I think passion takes a very central place. So, how do we build strong culture of the organization, and that often becomes the responsibility of the leadership team. And I'm saying leadership team, not just the founder or the main entrepreneur, but the initial 5 6 people who are joining and who are building it. So one I think for me is the culture of the organization. Second is the team. I think the basic the talent of the team that's coming together to build it in the initial maybe 3 to 5 years, not just 1 2 years, but I think initial 5 years become extremely critical to set the direction of the organization. तो पहले 5 सालों में हम क्या वो सीड प्लान कर रहे हैं, who are the people coming in, is it a very heavy entrepreneur driven organization or is it a team driven organization? Those I think becomes a very defining feature of where the organization is heading. And I think for me, sometimes team driven organizations are much more stronger. Entrepreneur or the founders will have their own role to represent. And I think that's a very important role to do. We can talk later about that also. But how strong is the team in the initial 5 years? That becomes like a very critical part. That is in my experience of both large and small organizations. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. So you talked about the importance of having a vision and the importance of building the initial team, both leadership and otherwise.
Yeah.
Shavita, would you like to add on to this?
Yeah, no, thanks, Gaurav, thanks, Prakhar. I think just building on from what Prakhar said, right? The passion with which everyone comes together for that common mission becomes important because that becomes the binding glue, especially for social purpose organizations. I totally echo Prakhar's sentiment that the people, and not just one leader, not just the founder, it's not at a CXO level, but the energy that the entire team brings together. I'll add two more aspects. I think just especially as we're talking about organization building as organizations grow, uh, a more explicit effort in building the culture of the organization becomes very important, right? Because as the organization is growing, how do we ensure the core DNA, मतलब वो उसको हम कैसे replicate कर पाएं? So whether it's explicitly putting out what the values of the organization are, not just on the wall or the website, but वो ways of working में कैसे आते हैं? So I think norms and ways of working based on a strong culture and values which holds this organization for the common mission together becomes important. Those are the two aspects I'll add to Prakhar's points.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, over the last 4 5 years, 6 years now, we've continuously tried to build on these initial pieces that you all have talked about. And I feel that, Prakhar, what you've called vision, I articulated as an inspirational vision. So you must be very, very clear as a founder or an entrepreneur, what is the social problem that you are looking to solve and for whom? And once that is clear, I think it becomes easier, not easy, but I would say easier for us to translate it into a story which is inspiring enough, not just for external stakeholders, but also for internal stakeholders. In fact, one of the things that founders tend to ignore in the initial stages of their journey is building the organization, because there's so much energy towards the external ecosystem and making things happen externally, and we almost take it for granted ki, we'll make things work internally. It doesn't happen automatically. It requires its own energy, and therefore over time, once you're able to articulate a vision, I think effort to maintain a continuous connect to that vision, because you've started it, and there's no I think most founders or entrepreneurs I've met in this space have very, very clear thoughts and ideas. but do not make enough efforts to maintain a continuous connect to that for their initial teams, for leadership. Then, maybe beyond that, the fact that the organization starts growing, work starts growing, you start actually moving to different areas, you must continuously work on also evolving the organization structure. Initially, I've experienced that organizations start as families. It's all about the meeting at the during tea at the local water cooler or whatever. You're getting together in very informal ways. You're not creating formal mechanisms. But a big part of org building is, as the org expands, to continuously work on the org structure, obviously get the right people, but also work on on creating engagement mechanisms with those. And then another big piece is the financial management piece. I mean, these for me are building blocks. Again, we tend to ignore, because we feel that it's very administrative, very boring work. I mean, I am very impact focused. I want to do something which makes a difference to the external world, but I need to get my act together internally so that I'm ready to create that external world. So the entire, and it's a very complex task, especially given the norms today we have around FCRA, around CSR. Managing finance and especially working capital becomes an extremely difficult task. So that focus is another big piece. And maybe lastly, I'll add, and we can add more later, is just continuous focus on identifying and pursuing synergistic partnerships. At least in the solving of social problem space, I think it's very evident that no one individual, one institution, and I would go on to say even one sector is samarth enough, since you have allowed a bilingual, is capable enough to solve social issues and problems on their own. So continuously pursuing synergistic partnerships is another one. Any comments, any reactions, response to that? And would you all like to add maybe more building blocks from your experience beyond vision and talent?
I would just add on the financial part that you're saying. I think Gaurav, also in the initial year, it gives a good direction on how we are imagining the sustainability of the organization from the financial lens. Because the team wise and all those things start becoming crucial, because we're seeing that if the team is not there, the work will not happen. But then finance also becomes like a critical part. How are we imagining the organization growing in the next 10 years? Because otherwise, if we don't have a clear vision, okay, we want a 50-member team or we want a 100-member team, how we are going ahead, I think that becomes critical in the initial years to have more clarity that, okay, this is what we want. Like for me, at least at Youth Alliance, when I was building, it was very clear that we don't want more than a 15-member team, because we don't wanted a lot of external financial pressure and a lot of those things. So that clarity was there. ISD, Indian School of Democracy, we had a different lens, we had a different thought process. That okay, this is what we want, and for that, this much resources we have to raise in the next 3 years. What is our pipeline? How is that looking like? And the programs then become very similar. So if you are raising like a big amount, if you are raising like 20 crores, then that means that the program and the impact number, everything will change. It will again impact how the team will experience the organization, and then how big the team will be, what will be the work culture, because it is very strongly intertwined. It can't be the external and internal has to have some harmony. I can't run an organization with a budget of 50 crores and not think to not have external pressure. I can't run an organization of maybe, I can maybe do that for a 1 crore organization or a 2 crore budget organization wherein there are less external pressures. But if it is a 50 crore organization, it can't be run without external pressure. And then my imagination is all dreamy, romantic, at a family run organization, a very good culture. But when the external pressure goes up, the culture takes a toss. So making that informed choice, are we preparing our team for that kind of rigor, which will need you to be on the toe constantly? There'll be less lean period in the year, which can be more lean period when it comes to a smaller budget organization. So that's I think been a great learning for me in the last 3 years, how the external and internal are very closely connected, which in the passion, the entrepreneur and the initial team forget that. But eventually when we take money and when we deliver, then the culture starts taking a hit. So how do we transition also with a lot of awareness? okay, we are moving from a 2 crore organization to a 20 crore organization. These things will change in the organization. So what are the processes that will enable to keep the culture smoother and not just run into it? Okay, someone has given us 5 crore, now we have to do 3 good politician program. Can we even do that? Is it humanly possible for us? Then making those difficult choices. Okay, we have to say no to this funder, or we have to say no to something like this. So those choices, because I think it takes hardly 18 months or maybe a year to see a shift in the organization culture, and then it takes maybe 2-3 more years to come back to the culture that that we are aspiring for. So I think that balance is something that I felt is important.
Shaveda, you have personally in CS have also witnessed this drastic shift of size, especially with the coming in of the BMGF grant. I'm assuming, I'm imagining, but do you concur with what Prakhar has said? And if so, what really changes when size changes?
I couldn't have agreed more. And Prakhar, thanks for also bringing it out at a personal, the way you gave a personal example of Youth Alliance mein kya soch thi, kya vision tha, and ab ISD mein kya hai. Gaurav, I'll come to your question specifically what it meant for us. But, as when both you and Prakhar were talking, the glamorous part of organization building is passion and people and culture, right? That gives us a high. वो सुन के अच्छा लगता है, बात करने में अच्छा लगता है. You're also both smiling when I said those terms. But there is a mundane, administrative, critical core that needs to be solved. And somebody put a question, what do we mean by internal finances? But as an organization grows, both in number of people, number of beneficiaries we want to work, we want to geographically expand, we want to get more donors. Prakhar articulated very directly as, 1 crore ka budget hai, 50 crore ka budget hai, right? There are the boring administrative finance process capabilities that every organization needs. And it's very important for us to be prepared for it, because we'll either be ahead of it and deliberately, have the process to design, or we'll get hit by it and we'll not know what happened to us. So even in our case, and thankfully our first big external donor, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, were very supportive of the fact that we were a relatively young organization. We were 5 years old when they chose to partner with us. In their own words, there are bureaucracy bigger than the Indian bureaucracy, that, there'll be a lot of processes coming your way. In fact, they specifically, 1 year into the partnership, BMGF insisted on running an organization diagnostic on whether or not you're ready to run an organization with a larger budget, with a bigger mandate. And not only did it talk of what is your operating model, or aap apna mission kaise achieve karenge, but even a basic thing as, if we are sending funding your way, do you have the financial capability to forecast, budget, report, and be compliant? So I think it becomes so important that what gets us excited, what gives us a high, has to be anchored on the very mundane, the very boring things that we don't necessarily appreciate and respect. But that core of that process becomes very, very important. And Gaurav, in our growth and journey, especially as today we work with multiple donors, those organization processes become very important, right? Otherwise, you're caught unaware. Worst case, there's a compliance risk, but more importantly, there's a reputation risk. The second point I wanted to add to this was, one is these internal processes. Second is the ability to work with external stakeholders. And Gaurav, aapne bhi bola ki it's almost sector ke beyond jana padega, right? Like one of the terms we very popularly use these days is collective impact. And collective impact beyond just my sector, across sectors, right? How is nutrition supporting education? How is education supporting employment? And I think, again, as with internal organization processes, ways of working with our stakeholders, whether it's government, whether it's other organizations, whether it's organizations I have a formal partnership, or sometimes I don't have a formal partnership, but we are, we're working with common stakeholders. Even defining that as a part of organization building becomes very important, because I genuinely feel that the organization brand has to stand for something, right? What is the meaning of engaging with, say, a ISDM or a Central Square Foundation or a Indian School of Democracy? And how do we ensure that that gets shared across the organization, irrespective of कि आप founder से बात कर रहे हैं, team member से बात कर रहे हैं, या field में बात कर रहे हैं? how do we ensure that experience is common?
Right. But Shavita, Prakar, both of you have talked about the mundane parts of organization building. What are, and maybe for the entrepreneurs on this forum, what are some of those mundane but really critical pieces which must be looked at if you really want to build strong, high-performing organizations? One of the things which comes to mind that we have always struggled with, when we were a 10-member organization, we didn't have someone looking at people processes. I mean, we all did it ourselves. I mean, there was, we created our first offer letters. When we started, we said, hey, we don't need a policy document for people, policies. We as a family would decide, on our own. Even till date, we, by the way, don't have a leave. We don't have a fixed number of leaves at ISDM, and we say, you decide. This is your organization. When you need a leave, you take a leave, and then you are responsible, you are accountable for your leaves, etc. When we started with this, it sounded romantic and it sounded very interesting. But I realized that when you put this responsibility on people, it's actually a lot of added pressure. I'm not used to it actually. I'm used to you telling me, boss, you have only 12 days, Chutti, you cannot take more than that. But now I'm saying, no, can take as many days, but you are responsible for it. And suddenly people start feeling extra pressure, this, that, work timings, you have work timings, you don't have work timings, etc., etc. So that's one part of this mundane. But as we became a 40-member organization, we now have a policy, in place, a written, more formal policy. Of course, we still don't have fixed leaves, but we have more. So what are these other mundane pieces that are very, very critical to do?
I think just one quick. So I think one thing that Youth Alliance people.
Prakat, your voice is a little bit soft, at least for me. I don't know if it's true for other people as well.
I'll try to speak louder. I think one thing that I hear from Youth Alliance regularly is that, and I think it's a very different culture, very family kind of organization, and often they will joke. One thing everything you have done right in Youth Alliance. One thing that we still struggle is that the governance structure is not right, and this is after like 12 years of it. So I see, and like I started when I was in my early 20s, all with passion. Governance किसको समझ में आता है कि वो होगा देखा जाएगा, what paper, all those things. What was important was 12A ATG because that is important. So got that done early 2011 only for Youth Alliance. But I think now when I look back is that there was no strong governance structure. There was an advisory board which was very helpful. An advisory board is not legally mandated. But I think now at ISD, because the budget and everything is much more, I think I strongly focus. I think last year only we got full-time accounting team on board. We pay them decently well every month so that those things can be taken care of, because also the nature of work that at ISD is also very critical in today's times, like talking about democracy, engaging with politics. So I think that is something which is like a mundane work, but I think we've ensured that either me or Himakshi keeps that, and we look into the legal things, paper signing, what is happening, board meeting, and all those legal compliances which often take a hit in the passion of the work, because that doesn't excite. But I think legal will never excite me, but it is a necessary evil that needs to be done, and a much more thorough way than anything else. Program का एक बार थोड़ा delay हो जाए, timeline चलेगा, but legal and especially because the work we are doing is so critical, it is very easy for any government to get a little bit off from us because we engage with political leaders. So at least our finances needs to be 100% correct, but it's 120% correct. So I think that's something has been a great learning. And like I say, the Youth Alliance people will meet me and joke me कि भैया वो एक चीज आपने ठीक नहीं करी, वो उसके अभी भी हमको कभी-कभी देखना पड़ता है कि वो क्या हुआ. But I think so that's one thing, Gaurav, that I'm still learning. Every 7th I still sit down, TDS गया सबका कि नहीं गया. I don't have to do much, but just looking at it, taking out 30 minutes to look at it, okay, it is done. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Shavita, any additions to this?
No, so Gaurav, जब आप ISDM की leave policy की बात कर रहे थे, I think for the first 4 years of CSF, in addition to what I did on the work, I was the admin head, finance head, HR head, right? 20 लोगों की organization थी. कितना ही reimbursement मुश्किल हो जाएगा, कितना ही budget बनाना मुश्किल हो जाएगा, right? You almost know कौन कब कहाँ है और क्या काम कर रहा है, right? So So that visibility was so clear to then, even before, I mean, in our case, because our first donor was an international donor, and the legal compliance on FCRA, as we all know, is way more complicated. So all of that got enforced. But at least the four aspects which I think are very important. And also, Gaurav, I go back to what you said, that, we get so busy in doing the work because हम exist ही क्यों करते हैं? My reason for existence is the work. So now, should I do the work or should I do the back end processes, right? वो किसी को मतलब वो मजा नहीं है, उस काम में मजा नहीं है. That's honestly at the heart of it, right? जो प्रखर भी कह रहे हैं कि legal, TDS, यार इसलिए थोड़ा मैं स्पेस में आई हूँ या आया हूँ, right? But I think making sure our people processes, how do we hire? How do we support people? How do we manage their performance? How do we even handle attrition, right? Because starting में वो family वाली feel में लगता है कि हमें तो लोग कभी छोड़कर ही नहीं जाएंगे. हम तो बहुत mission driven है, mission aligned है. But eventually, as you grow as an organization, people's aspirations might also change, right? They might stay in the sector, but not with the organization. So looking at the whole HR process, finance becomes super important, right from what is your policy on reimbursement to how are you doing your CSR and your FCRA donor management. I think third is overall governance, which Prakhar also spoke about, right? Matlab, all of us know how to get the certificate because that's, matlab, the first step hota hai organization ke setup hone ka. But there are, especially now as rules are becoming so much more complicated, CSR is seeking the last mile utilization within the financial year, right? We need to be prepared to respond to those changes, and they will only, I mean, the sign around us is this will only get more complex, right? So the whole governance becomes super important. Another one I will want to add is, and Prakhar did allude to the advisory board, but I think the sooner we can set up the cadence of a board meeting, and maybe it starts small. Not every board has to be a fiduciary board which takes responsibility for the financial governance and accountability. But even having that structured space where the organization is taking a pause, making that effort to engage with the board, taking their inputs on the strategic direction and growth of the organization, which again, right, लगता है कि you're all mission driven, we are high energy people, we will make the right decisions, and there is so much to do, right? I mean, I also, honest admission, there's been a phase in our work where the board meeting felt like, yaar, ab ye bhi karna padega, right? Where do I prioritize my energy? But realizing what a critical component it is of organization building and institutionalization, and making sure due time and attention is done, right? बहुत easy है इसको एक compliance way से करना, हाँ हमने board meeting कर ली, versus actually leveraging it effectively. So I think those are the few things I'll add.
No, wonderful, Shavita and Prakhar. I think you've covered the thoughts beautifully. So, org building has multiple pieces, some glamorous, some not so glamorous. So, the common purpose, the vision, the culture building, the talent, initial building of the initial leadership team. I think all those are really fun for most founders we've seen. But then putting in place the hard infrastructure to make all of this happen, right? From governance, and Shavita talked about boards, and Prakhar talked about advisory committees, to compliances, to legalities, to accounting, to finance, taxation. And by the way, all of this is true irrespective of the legal form of your organization. You might be a for-profit, you might be a not-for-profit. All of these are equally true for both these elements. Of course, things like CSR and FCRA are more specific not-for-profit elements, but the rest and for-profit have their own compliances. So the Companies Act in India has done enough to ensure that you are kept busy, on various kinds of compliances, service tax, GST, this, that, TDS. You will be very busy. So, seen enough entrepreneurs and founders who've told me, Gaurav, why should I do this? I mean, this is not why I came here, right? And I think one of the takeaways, hopefully, from this discussion is whether it's glamorous and sexy or not, without this, it's very difficult to maintain and sustain the actual work that you want to do. This is almost the backbone which supports that kind of work. But moving ahead, from this, the next question on my mind really is, organization building is is a long process. It's an evolutionary process. It doesn't happen in 1 year, 2 years. It keeps happening, and continuously you have to keep working on it. So, what are some of the biggest risks that one faces maybe in the first 5, 7, 8 years of an organization's existence that entrepreneurs on this forum should keep in their minds?
I missed one sentence. What is it that?
What are some of the biggest risks that organizations face in the first 5, 7, 8 years? I'm saying if we can share, I'm sure the entrepreneurs on this forum would benefit from that, and they can just keep that in mind. So, any thoughts on what are those big risks that we should keep in mind?
Shweta, you want to go first?
Sure, Prakhar. Very interesting question, Gaurav. That how things to keep in mind, and for me, the biggest is one of the biggest risk is that the organization grows at a pace faster than you're ready for. सुन के अच्छा लगता है कि हम इतना अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं और लोग हमारे साथ जुड़ रहे हैं और पार्टनरशिप्स मिल रही हैं और अलायंसेस बन रही हैं और फंडिंग मिल रहा है. But if I am not ready for that growth, be it on my people aspect, my process aspect, my operating model, because everything needs to be pressure tested, right? I mean, we were talking about how, I mean, even your example of leave policy, right? 10 लोगों के लिए उसको norm करना और follow करना आसान था. When the 10 became 40, you use the word that for some people it was additional pressure. यार आप ही बता दो क्या करना है, right? So one of the biggest risks I feel is that we don't do the boring hard work to be ready for the growth and opportunity that comes our way. And we assume that these are issues or problems or capabilities which a larger organization needs. मेरे लिए अभी relevant नहीं है. मेरा ऐसे चल रहा है. ये इतना काफी है. I don't have to invest in it. Because the worst that can happen is that you have the opportunity, but you're not ready to leverage that. You're not ready to effectively engage on that. So I think at the start I'd said, right, that is this something that is happening to you? Like you're caught unaware? Yeah, you are prepared for it. And I think especially as a founder, especially as that core founding team, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're ahead of that, right? If it means that, don't just think of what is required for me today, what is required for where I want to be in the next 3 to 5 years. I think defining your org processes and ways of working with that lens becomes super important.
Lovely. Prakhar, big risks in org building, in the initial years of org building.
I think one of the first and the biggest is that how do I stay true to the vision that I've seen, with which I've started? And I think because it is very easy to get swayed away by what the market forces or the funding organization are saying. Maybe you started with something, and a lot of organizations, if you see, also start with something and they realize much later that they have strayed away and they're doing something very different. Started into education, now they're into skill building, which if it is a conscious choice, it's a very good thing. But if it is not a conscious choice, then I think it is regret that comes to us after like running it for 7-8 years. कि okay, मैंने शुरू तो कुछ और करने के लिए किया था, और अभी ऐसे लग रहा है जो करने के लिए शुरू किया था वो मेरा एक छोटा प्रोडक्ट बन गया है 30-40%, but 70% I'm doing something which is very different. So I think वो एक बहुत बड़ा मुझे लगता है रिस्क एक होता है ऑर्गेनाइजेशन रनिंग में. And I've seen a lot of my friend entrepreneurs also who started together. 2011-12 में हम लोग शुरू कर रहे थे. I was at Youth Alliance, they were a different organization, and we would like talk. And I think for that, what has at least helped me is to stay very one. I think having a like 4-5 close friends or mentors, जहाँ पे जाके आप ऐसे sounding board की तरह कर सकते, which is not like an advisory board, which is very tactical sometimes, but more of a personal sounding board. Okay, this is why I started. Then within team also, are there 3-4 anchors who will show the light? जिसके बाद अगर वो बोलेंगे मुझे फीडबैक भी देंगे, प्रखर दिस इज नॉट व्हाट वी स्टार्टेड 3 years back, so I don't take it on my ego. So I think एक तो बड़ा रिस्क है कि how do we not get swayed away because of the market forces or the funding available, because at least that's my pain point in the ecosystem, that a lot of times organizations set their work in alignment with to what is the funding availability. So that I think becomes like a big thing. Second, I think just to I can add on is that how do founders or the founding team let go of their obsession with the organization after 5-6 years, maybe if they really want to make it a big organization, or a lasting organization, it will not be in the, maybe the value system should be kept intact. Okay, these are the three foundational values that have to keep at the center, but everything else needs to be open for being challenged or questioned, or at least step back to let other energies also come in. Because we started this organization not because at some level it was my dream. That's why that fulfillment needs to be there. But the larger idea is that it has to be beneficial to the society or the people we are working with. And I think I've seen many times that there's that one founder is still there after 30 years, which is okay to be. But can we let go of certain things? Can we like step back in a much more aware way and see, okay, let the other energies flow in. So I think those two important things, and maybe in that only it will come that if the org wants a very different structure than what I needed or what I aspired, then maybe like willing to take that risk to open it in a very different structure. So I think these three things that I would say are the risks that we should be willing to take. Yeah.
Wonderful. So what you said, I completely resonate with, Prakar. I call it mission or scope creep. And I think that's a huge risk that, you start with something. And I just saw a question from Richa when she said that, isn't entrepreneurship about evolving? And, you keep finding newer and newer ways. Yes, Richa, and I would completely support that. There is this danger between becoming too rigid and becoming too flexible. When you become too rigid, you are not able to evolve. You're just not able to maybe adapt to changing realities, adapt to things that have completely transformed in the ecosystem around you. But when you're too flexible, you really don't stand for anything. So, and then, what I started with, the organization becomes the entity you are serving rather than the other way around, which is the organization servicing a core purpose goal that you started on. And continuously, I think, maintaining that focus on why have I started this, or why have we started this? What is the problem that we're looking to solve? You can have flexibilities, and you should have, on the strategies around it, on the theory of change around it, or if you say, hey, the way I understood and articulated the problem was wrong, and then that changes, that's also fine. But the danger is that the problem exists, all of that exists, but I start doing something else because the external funding ecosystem pushes me that's one of the reasons, in a certain direction. I don't have a heart in that. And it happened during COVID, by the way. And while some organizations actually took a conscious call of getting into COVID related work, others were pushed into it because they realized that if they don't do it, there's no way for them to survive because funding was only available for that. While COVID is an okay example to do it, but in non-COVID normal circumstances also it happens. So mission and scope creep is definitely one. The second big risk in my mind is not finding the right co-founders or the initial team. Entrepreneurship can be a very lonely journey, a very, very lonely journey. So if you're not able to find the right people around you, sometimes it can become very difficult. And a related risk to that, I feel, is the risk of running out of steam. Entrepreneurship is very difficult. And when I say it's lonely, it's also it's a 24/7 engagement. It can never be a 9 to 5, 9 to 6 job. Monday to Friday, 9 to 6. Entrepreneurship is a non-stop engagement. So how do you tune your mind to realizing that this is not a sprint, but a marathon? It's a very difficult balancing act. I don't think I've been able to do it. I've been really struggling to do it, because I realized it's a marathon and I have to pace myself. If I don't, I will burn out. And if I burn out, it doesn't help anyone, by the way. It doesn't help the cause, doesn't help the organization, definitely doesn't help me. Another risk is getting trapped in what I call getting caught up in what I call an activity trap. Is you're continuously working, and becoming busy becomes very, very important. In some ways, it's your idea of success, but you're busy doing things which are urgent, not necessarily important. And that differentiation between urgent and important comes when you're able to plan. most initial stage org building entrepreneurs do not have the time for planning. They actually find it too mundane. Planning and strategy as an exercise is fairly mundane. So if you don't do that, there's a risk of continuously just running on a treadmill without making significant headway towards what you want to make. And maybe last, and I've talked about this earlier, is the danger of running out of working capital. Working capital means is based on the realization that every month I have bills to pay. You may have raised money and you may have enough money, but that money may have a timeline to it. And suddenly you realize, oh my God, that money is only going to come 3 months from now. But for the next 3 months, I don't have enough money to pay my bills. That's working capital. How do I take care of my expenses on a regular basis? So that's another big risk that organizations really run in their initial stages of building. But yeah, that's an interesting. Anything else, Shavita and Prakhar, before I move on maybe to another thought, but anything else you want to add to this point? Okay, then maybe before we open up for Q&A, the last and in my mind, one of the most interesting thoughts, and the Sati Venture folks told us that this forum will consist of both profit first and mission first organizations. And I'm deliberately not saying for profit and not for profit. I'm saying profit first and mission first organizations. So in your mind, your experience, is there any difference in how one approaches organization building in a profit first organization and a mission first organization? Is there a difference? If yes, then what? Shavita, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, Gaurav. In many ways, I think this question is central to everything that we've been discussing, right? So I think there is a huge difference. And the huge difference begins from, to me, it speaks to every part of how the organization comes together. What's my reason for existence? What's my operating model? Who my stakeholder is? My ways of working, my norming. I think all of that, whether I'm mission first or profit first, will have a huge and very direct impact on all the components of how I work and how I come together. I strongly feel that sometimes we try and brush aside the big delta that compensation means in a mission first or a profit first organization. But I do want to address the elephant in the room, that one distinction also becomes by definition, the economic model of the organization, whether you're mission first or profit first, is very different. I think the norms of working around that become very different. The markers of success become very different. I mean, typically, to me, the biggest delta is in a profit first organization. There are indicators which are universally accepted, right? When I say profit before tax, सबको पता है उसका क्या मतलब है, right? Whereas in a mission first organization, and you use the word theory of change, right? It's a much harder journey. Every step of that transition is so much harder, and you're doing it in a more dynamic environment. You're doing it in an environment where your degrees of control are lower. So to me, this very, very distinct, very, very different. In the Indian context, I think it's also a function of how mature the mission first organizations, the development sector, as we call it. It's also the stage of maturity at which we are right now. I think we've seen significant growth, activity, development over the last a decade or two, but we still have a long way to go. So I think a lot of those indicators, processes, and a shared understanding of those terms doesn't exist today.
Thank you so much. Prakhar.
I think one thing which comes to me, and I think Shweta, you touched it before also. How do we also see the difference in today's time versus it should have been originally? In the original context, mission first or profit first should have been same only. It is the modern times that has brought in this whole idea of कि पैसा कमाना ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है than this. So essentially, any organization formed on this planet essentially should be for a social cause only. Some need that the people have, some need that we all have on society, and any organization, be it a Reliance, be it a CSF or ISDM or ISD, is serving that need of the society. So सबका mission first ही है गौरव, अगर वैसे देखा जाए. But now I think with all this inequity and everything coming in, I think now the difference has become so massive. And for me, I think in mission first, ideally the individual who is working in those organizations, the team comes at the center. And and the premise is also key, until and unless the individual well-being will not be taken care of, organization well-being, it is difficult to take care of it. We are, I think, drifting way too away from it. But that should be in the mission first organization कि मेरे जो साथ में है, मेरे घर पे है, अगर मैं उसको ही थोड़ा बेसिक खुश या उसको ही नहीं सुन पा रहा हूँ, then what will I do about a listening module doing at a in a tribal belt or in a rural area if I am not listening my partner in my home, my mother or my siblings? How will I even listen someone else? So same in the organization also. I think first and foremost, mission first में somewhere the people who are doing this become the very important central piece, and their well-being, their needs being taken care of become very important. Second, I think on the compensation side, if you also touched, is that I think a lot of people, if we see, and especially I've been here for like around 10, 12 years now, is a lot of people make a choice to do this with not keeping the paycheck and the mind. Many people who join this, the financial remuneration is not what is the central theme. It is an important theme and it must be important. People should be paid fairly in the development space also. But that's not the central piece. A lot of people who join ISC team also take a pay cut also and come here because the idea of democracy seems important to them, because the idea that democracy is not working in the way it should have worked for the last 7 decades seems important to them, and that's why they're making that choice. And money is not the central piece. So I think that, how do we also see that? And there's some different form of, because I think often the profit first organization, the central capital in life is the financial capital. But for us, maybe, and for many other, financial capital is one form of capital. There's a spiritual capital that comes over there. There's a moral capital also that plays a role. There's a experiential capital that plays a role. The kind of conversation that I'm having will define my own being. And I think multiple things are often taken care of. And that's why I think the huge difference comes. The satisfaction that I feel because I do this is very different, and that can't be compensated into money. So I think those things become important. But I think having said that, one thing that at least I see a shift in the development space is that somewhere I think what we are trying to do is we are trying to put in the law for profit, exactly replicate that in development space. That might be a little tricky part in the coming decade, where in the essence and the service or the सेवा भाव जो हम बोलते हैं, वो एक जो था डेवलपमेंट स्पेस का, और शायद था भी नहीं बोलूंगा मैं, है आई वुड से, वो शायद कहीं ना कहीं टू मच प्रोफेशनलिज्म के चक्कर में, और वो जो सिंपल जो लॉज और प्रैक्टिसेस ऑफ द फॉर प्रॉफिट हैं, वो हम सेम रेप्लिकेट कर रहे हैं, उससे जा सकता है. एंड मैं आई थिंक पेन पॉइंट ऑफन इज दैट कि if a corporate guys or a folk who has worked in corporate for 20 years, I think डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर में ऐसे हाथ पसार के खड़े रहते हैं, आ जाइए आपने तो बड़ा कीर्तिमान स्थापित किया है और आप सब छोड़ के एहसान कर रहे हैं हमारे ऊपर. क्या 15 साल जिसने डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर में किया था, हिंदुस्तान यूनिलीवर वैसे ही हाथ पसार के लेगा उनको? नहीं लेगा. So somewhere what we are doing as an ecosystem is that we are also not valuing the learning, the talent that a grassroots I'm saying grassroots politician. That's how much it has gone inside my head. That a grassroots worker would know, which will be very essential, but we don't see it in the same lens. We see someone who has done it at HUL 15 years. We will be excited. Okay, someone lateral entry is happening. They have taken a big job cut. So that is something which I feel is something a little bit skewed sense in which we see the development space, and we don't see it at equity just because finances come from the corporate world. Often we don't see them as equal. We're just looking up कि कुछ तो अलग है, कुछ तो जादू है. But yeah, that's my at least thought process, how we are different. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Maybe just adding on to some of the things. It's very rare, by the way, on this question to have, a panel concurring and, having, normally this is a fairly divisive question. And I would have hoped that Shavita would have come very strongly against this differentiation and said, no, org building is org building, and, why should it be different across sectors? So maybe I'll add on, and I'm more biased because again, where ISDM comes from in some senses. But for me, org building and organization building really has its roots in the goals that you are looking to pursue, and the goals are, shouldn't be different, as Prakhar said, but they are different. So from saying short-term wealth creation or short-term returns for shareholders to saying longer-term value creation for a wide variety of stakeholders, including the planet. So if that basic articulation is different, then the org building process will be different in many ways, from strategy to culture to the kind of people to what they start doing, to the way you are doing communication, what you communicate on, etc. So one fundamental difference is this. The second difference is, in a mission first organization, the problem is bigger than the organization or the self. You exist not to grow the organization, but to solve the problem. Whereas in a for-profit setup or a profit-first setup, the goal is to grow the organization. And therefore, that makes a big difference in the way you look at strategy. And fundamentally comes down to this difference of competition versus collaboration. When it is yourself that you're looking to grow, then you will compete. And in MBA schools, and I come from one, we're taught continuously to compete, right? That's the holy grail of innovation. It's the holy grail of making things happen. And maybe it works in a setup where my goal is to grow myself. But in a setup where my goal is to solve a problem, I cannot but think that I cannot compete, but I have to collaborate. And then fundraising also becomes increasing my share of impact rather my share of wallet. And these are very core business management terms, because a core for-profit entity, a profit-first entity will always say, how do I increase my share of wallet, not share of impact. To saying, hey, even how we look at people, in a profit-first entity, because the shareholder is most important, the team becomes resources in a production function, actually. And that's how economics defines people. So like you have physical resources, you have financial resources, you have human resources. So you and I and everyone else on this call are just resources which go into a production function, versus a larger societal, social problem-solving lens where all of us are partners in making this happen. And we are people with agency, and we are people with free will. And therefore, how do you create a culture to actually deal with these different views of people? To communication where, in one setup, I want to communicate about me and myself, whereas in the other setup, I want to communicate and evangelize the issue that I'm working on, and continuously talk about that and raise awareness about that and get more people involved there. So I'll take a break here. I think it's been a wonderfully engaging session with multiple perspectives on how to build organizations, risks in building those organizations, and maybe differences between profit first and mission first. We have about 5-7 minutes left. I'll maybe stop for any Q&A if there are any questions, and we can take that. One of the Sati Ventures team, are you going to help us with it, or shall we just quickly look at the chat window? Okay, so somebody says, how can we create learning organizations? And another question is around how can we promote diversity and inclusion? And is there a continuous recalibration through participation from people lower on the hierarchy? So I'm leaving these questions if any of you want to pick up any one of them.
I'll pick the one on learning organization. It's one of my favorite. I think just that concept and the idea. And to me, it comes from the humility in knowing that we are not a know-it-all. If as an organization, you're curious and you're looking to learn and grow and stretch, and if you're approaching it from, I don't have all the answers, right? I think one of the questions earlier in the chat was that isn't being an entrepreneur also being, dynamic, evolving, being responsive. To me, a lot of that also comes to a learning organization, right? And of course, as an organization grows, repetition in an operating model to deliver with a certain efficiency and effectiveness becomes important. but the humility to know that we are working in a dynamic world. We are working with stakeholders, and the system and the ecosystem itself is going through its own dynamic changes. And at no point in time I can have accounted for all of it and have come up with this ideal solution, right? That everything around me can change, but I am so thorough in what I'm doing that I don't need to change. So I think just humility and accepting that no person, no entrepreneur, no founder, no one organization can know all the answers. We live in a dynamic world. Rate of change is growing exponentially. I mean, if anything, that's what last 2 years of COVID has taught us, right? We've all learned and worked in an environment we never thought would, even exist. So I think just that humility and curiosity uh, will ensure that the organization allows the space to be a learning organization. Because Gaurav, I mean, at least Gaurav Prakhar would love to hear your perspective. मुझे लगता है that you know we don't want to admit कि हमारे पास सारे answers नहीं है, right? Ego रास्ते में आ जाता है, right? मुझे तो सब आता है, मुझे learn करने की क्या जरूरत है? So the counter of that is the humility in saying I know what I know, but things around me are changing, and how do I continue to make the effort to keep myself updated?
Lovely. So humility and the ability to put your ego to the side, and at ISDM, one of our favorite things is we keep saying we've started ISDM on the principle of collective wisdom. We started by saying we don't have all the answers, and we said that it's going to be built on on collective wisdom. The other piece I want to quickly add before Prakhar, I'll take you to another question on learning organization is the ability to ask why. Because in reviews we actually spend a lot of time asking what happened, Achha, this happened, but we rarely ask the why question multiple times. And once you go into that double loop of learning, triple loop of learning, where you continuously ask why, is where you then also put emphasis on people in the organization to try and find deeper answers and continuously add to organizational learning. But Prakhar, for you, one question. From an org building lens, how do we promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Thanks, Gaurav. I think it begins with diversity and inclusion within the team. And I think that's been one important learning for me. And I think one of our advisors, every time we get on a call, he asks, do you have this community in the team or not? And I think every time we go out for recruitment, sometimes we specifically look and promote like our recruitment application in a particular team, particular groups wherein we can get that. Because I think especially for us at Indian School of Democracy, we are working on democracy, so diversity and inclusion becomes utmost. It should be important for all, but because we are working in a specific area, so it becomes extremely important that we have religious minorities in the team, we have caste minorities in the team, we have class differences within the team also. Because what is also happening, and I think this is a classic example of tyranny of merit, and there's a book written by on
Michael
this
Sandel. Michael Sandel.
And he's also written, yeah, there's another, yeah, so I think is essentially one kind of people will reach at their top, English speaking, very good presentation, certain kind of accent. And if you have to challenge that, you have to see merit in different pool of people who might not bring the skill of building a great presentation or speaking fluent English, बट वो शायद जो अपने अनुभव लेके आएंगे अपने जमीन से, जो अपने पर्सनल लिव्ड रियलिटी के, मतलब शायद मुझे, क्योंकि मैं एक अपकास्ट मेल वहां से आता हूँ, हिंदू मेजोरिटी कम्युनिटी से, तो मुझे शायद कुछ अनुभव किताब से पढ़ने पड़ेंगे या जाके अटेम्प्ट करना पड़ेगा एक्सपीरियंस करने के लिए. बट आई थिंक वो जो क्लासिक अंतर है गांधी और अंबेडकर में, गांधी हैड टू एक्सपीरियंस इट, उनको एक्सपेरिमेंट ऑफ ट्रुथ करने पड़ेंगे, और अंबेडकर के जीवन में तो बचपन से वो जी रहे हैं. So I think that we need to see, is it happening in our teams also? Are we getting people whose lived realities have been very different than my lived reality? So they don't want to experiment on कि मैं 3 दिन का fast करके देखूं what is hunger, and someone would have lived that. So I think that becomes very important, क्योंकि जैसे ही वो lens team में आएगा और जैसे ही हम उनको financial compensation में बराबर देखने लगेंगे, and financial compensation becomes very important, is that we don't see them equal. We see, और I think काफी language मैंने देखी सोशल मीडिया में, blue blood और पता नहीं white कौन से blood जो एक language होती है, and sometimes I have a very big problem with that language used. I also come from a very good university, so I am also in that bucket. But at least in the teams I've been part of, we've ensured that it doesn't happen within the teams. There's fair compensation, and it is not seen, because I think people get to those positions most often because of the their personal background because of the privilege that they are born in. So how do we challenge that ovarian lottery that a lot of us have got because we have born somewhere? So I think इसलिए inclusion is an extra mile walk that we have to take within our organization to bring people who are different than us. Uh, so that, yeah, so that's my, I think, first answer. Second, I think in our programs, if we see, we work with political leaders, and it is extremely difficult to get women application because overall pool of women political leaders is much lesser. In our parliament, we have 14% women. In our MLAs across the country, we have 11%. So then our 70% of our outreach effort is to get women applications only. So it is not exact same. So what is the input that we are making when it comes to inclusion? It will not be same कि हमने normal रखा. अगर हमको inclusion करना है तो हमको ज़्यादा resources लगाने पड़ेंगे inclusion को enable करने के लिए. And that's been a big learning for us कि हमको 60-70% अपना सिर्फ महिलाओं के application लाने के लिए effort लगाना पड़ता है. Maybe 30-40% for 30% for men. तो आई थिंक वो एक चॉइस है जो आई थिंक अब सीखने को मिल रही है कि सेम एफर्ट डाल के हम सोचेंगे इंक्लूजन होगा तो नहीं होगा. इट्स अ चॉइस. इट विल नीड एक्स्ट्रा रिसोर्सेज, एक्स्ट्रा एफर्ट, एंड यू हैव टू काउंट फॉर देम इन द प्लानिंग फेज ओनली, नॉट लीव इट कि हमने तो एप्लीकेशन में लिखा था बट फिर भी नहीं आए. आई थिंक इट विल नॉट हैपन लाइक दैट.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think we are just past our time. Prakhar, I will end this question that you started. I will end by saying we learn most from people who are least like us.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Prakhar. Thank you, Shavita. It's been an interesting discussion over the last hour. And I hand it back to the organization. Thank you, Sati Ventures, for inviting us and wishing all the very best over the next couple of days for your summit.